Hello. So Dietitian Ashley Koff here. Today I wanted to do a session on medicinal mushrooms because we are in, if you're watching this live or sometime in the recent time period, it's August of 2022 and the explosion continues. I think I've been fortunate in my career to be able to really be at the sort of the front end of the mushroom craze with both evaluating products, learning from incredible experts, and being a part of putting ingredients into products. But as I've been doing that, I've also evaluated and unfortunately watched companies make decisions that are not better for the consumer on that part, that they're really playing into sort of the marketing side of medicinal mushrooms. Well, why does the marketing side of medicinal mushrooms work? Well, there's really amazing great things to say about medicinal mushrooms. So first and foremost, I did a live yesterday. So again, if you're in this time period watching either live or in sort of recent time, you can head over to our Instagram at the Better Nutrition Program, or at it's actually on mine, Ashley Koff Approved, and learn about some of the quality considerations that companies go through, because there are really important decisions to make. But today I wanted to talk about recommendations as practitioners, what we really want to be considering, whether we're making those choices for ourselves, for family members, or for our patients. And starting to think about, what are the benefits. So mushrooms as a category are fun guys, if you will. Mushrooms, what really distinguishes medicinal mushrooms, in my opinion, is their medicinal use. So using them as part of the healing process, using them from a preventative health standpoint, using them often in conjunction with dietary lifestyle recommendations, and including medications. And so as a result, it's really important that you know your stuff when it comes to the choices and the recommendations that you're going to make. So what I thought I would do, which I always do first, is share our guide, the Medicinal Mushrooms Guide, that if you have the toolkit, you have access to. If you want to get the toolkit, you also look at this month's new tool, which is the Stress Guide, Assessing and Addressing Stress, which I talked about last week. So the video is still here. And also our coming up tool, which are better nutrition swaps. So really helping people go from those not so good to better choices from a nutrition standpoint. So that's coming up in September. But let me take you through our medicinal guide. This is one that I really like and has evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years. So one of the key things, why do we start off showing mushrooms and coffee, is because it's like peanut butter and jelly these days. It's like everybody except for Ashley is putting powders into their coffee. I love like great quality, great tasting espresso, and the most that I'll put in there is homemade cashew milk or oat milk, but I ain't gonna put other stuff in my coffee. And there are a couple of reasons for that, which I will go into. But a lot of people are, and a lot of things are being served, smoothies, smoothie powders, multivitamins, they're adding mushrooms in there. What about, there are other, you see it in bars and other places. There's a lot of places where they're going. And again, the reasons is that they do so many good things. Like they help support our immune system to naturally work, to keep it in balance. Really moving away from that concept of immune boosting, they're immune supporting. Likewise, supporting skin health. Some mushrooms are more specific to that. Some go sort of directionally from a digestive health standpoint. Some are overall helping us, relax and recover better. And that, of course, helps our skin. And also to really help us push it, when we want to push it from a performance standpoint, an energy standpoint, and then of course the recovery that we need, the sleep as it relates to that. And so there are, while the evidence, it's interesting when you start to actually review the evidence in mushrooms, you do have to be careful, because a lot of lacking human studies. There's great anecdotal evidence, especially in mushroom use over centuries. When you look into Chinese medicine and you look in Ayurveda and cultures that have and medicinal cultures that have been using them. But I think it's important when you look at the research to recognize that even though a lot of statements are being made, not all of those statements are being made from human studies. Of course, animal studies can be helpful and directional, but that also means that fluctuations, when we look at what's better for maybe a woman from a hormone health standpoint and a man, and a child, etc. And so we really do have to understand the mechanisms for how these are acting, and then also be really clear, and I'm going to keep hammering on this, about the quality and the source, as a result, the source. What part of the mushroom are you getting? Because medicinal mushrooms have the fruiting body, which is really what by definition has them, is what defines them as a mushroom, as that fungi. And then they also have other parts to them, and we'll go through that because not all things are located in one spot. But you can see, one of the primary reasons for medicinal mushrooms popularity and for mushrooms popularities overall are the plant nutrients, the compounds that are found in there, including the beta glucans. And also, mushrooms have popularity for their ability to produce a vegetarian form of vitamin D, which what we're seeing more and more really depends on your genetics in terms of how useful that is for you. And the body's ability to convert also depends, of course, on things like digestive health, etc. But that is something to look at. And then there's, kind of looking at the life cycle of it, where it's going from the spores to produce the mycelium, and that's really what becomes that fruiting body. So those are, that's an important to understand that there's a lot of growth that's in there, especially if you've ever watched mushrooms like growing in the woods, as you see them growing on wood. There's a long phase that's going on there. And you'll see that the fruiting body develops, and that's, again, what by definition is really giving you that whole mushroom, is that mycelium and the fruiting body. But the mycelium by itself is not the by definition, what we call the mushroom on that piece. So we give you some more information on that part, and then we do go into the benefits. And again, these are research benefits, that there are evidence, that they are evidence-based, and then there's also anecdotal evidence from, years, hundreds, centuries, years of usage, and really amazing things. One of my favorite stories, I tell this often, is just, learning about mushrooms, their use in recovery of and restoration. And so today we often talk about that as regenerative, being able to regenerate soil, being able to regenerate from an environmental standpoint. So where there was the massive Exxon Valdez spill, mushrooms were brought in to bring life back to an area that had been, oil slicked over. So really interesting, when we look at that part. Because of that, one of the reasons I harp on quality so much is that mushrooms are bioaggregators. They're going to go in and they're going to take from the environment what is there. And that means if there's a lot of pesticide residue, if there are other toxins, then those may also be present in your mushroom. And so that's going to be important for you to be evaluating as well. So quality, quality, quality. It's why wild crafted, while lovely, and foraging for mushrooms, while phenomenal, and I highly recommend it, and it's so fun to do, and to do with somebody who is learned in it, to be able to steer you clear of what isn't better. It's really important to understand that wild crafted, so wild mushrooms may not be able to deliver you. First of all, you don't know the consistency of the amount of what you're finding in there, in the mushroom. So if we're looking at something for healing purposes or benefits, within that. And then the second part is air pollution, ground pollution, the different things that I've talked about. They mentioned even animal feces, radiation. That's really big with chaga. So love wild. I love it for, so many different benefits, including the benefits of going out yourself and being in nature, and doing all of that. But also noting that there can be challenges. And then there's this whole area of extracts. So really think of extracts the way we think of extracts in other areas, isolates. I think this is really going to help your patient understand, this, where, for example, a DHA or an EPA extract, an isolate there, is not the same thing as eating. It's not a fish oil. It is an oil from fish, or that could be found in fish, but it's not eating the fish. And there's so much research that shows the benefits of eating the fish, and getting in those different omega-3s, including something like HPA, which, in addition to the EPA and the DHA. So I think that is really going to be important. And then also how it's extracted is going to be important. So that's where we think about things like oils, where we know there can be high heat, or even chemical extraction of oils from nuts and seeds versus, say, mechanical and cold pressing with olive oil. So some of these, if we can have analogies that may be understood in other areas, that will be helpful. But extracts can have, I think of it like CBD, where, I like to get the full spectrum or broad spectrum, but there might be times where getting the extract so that we can be very clear of what's not in there, like that there's zero THC, that could be a benefit, right? And so it's not to throw the extracts out, but it's just really important to understand that an extract is going to be different than something that is a whole compound. And there may be reasons, so for example, here, alpha glucan from shiitake mushroom for anti-tumor activity, just being clear about that. And then whole medicinal mushrooms that are grown in a controlled or protected environment are going to allow us to have greater confidence in the quantity of certain nutrients, because they're tested, what's in there, what they're grown on, the cleanliness of that, the cleanliness of the air, et cetera, in that capacity. And then they're grown on different substrates. So they could be grown on, things that they're meant to grow on. So it's kind of like wild salmon living in their oceans versus, say, a farm salmon where they could still be farming them in like Norway, off the coast of Norway in the waters there, but they could also be farming them in a place where they're not in their natural habitat, not having exposure to what they eat, normally being fed different things, et cetera. So we just have to really look at, what it's grown on and how that works. And so within here, there are a lot of within our tool, just general FAQs. These are great if you want to do something on medicinal mushrooms from a content standpoint. This gives you content, to be able to use repeatedly, like through, whether it's social media or emails or things like that. So I just want to share, that we have that certainly in here, and looking at, how specific medicinal mushrooms work. And I'm going to come over to that in a second. Things like what about, failing a drug test or anything else within that part. What about eating mushrooms as opposed to taking mushrooms? And it'll show in here also some information on how things should be labeled, so that you want to know if it's an extract or not, et cetera, on that part. Because I feel like in terms of, let me just see, I was just checking out something. Yeah, it's going to show you, I was looking at one of the products, and I'll be able to show that in a second. In terms of being clear about if something is extracted or if it isn't, that's going to help you understand, again, what you're getting, how much of it you're getting, et cetera. And then no guide or tool would be complete without a way to show deliciously doable ways for getting in your mushrooms on that part. So let me pause there with the tool and just the introduction to medicinal mushrooms. Anything, one of the things that I find so beneficial about this tool is really being able to initiate number one, obviously, if somebody has a question or if you're wanting to share the content, we're going into fall, so it's a really good time. Like I'm up in Maine, and we just got a ton of rain, and so we're going to go foraging for some porcinis on Sunday. Like, you can have these conversations and be able to use that to open this up, but it's also going to help you have conversations about, what supplements or why maybe a supplement as opposed to, adding something to your coffee, as I started the conversation, and those pieces. So I think the tool can be extremely useful in that capacity. Also, if you're, say, a nutrition professional, it might be a great tool to share with, say, a doctor's office as a way to give them something that then somebody could be referred over to you with, where it's, hey, I wanted to share this tool in case somebody has questions. You put your information on there, they're referred over to you, and you can sort of help them sort their whole mushroom situation. And I'm going to come to the specific mushrooms and recommendations in a moment, but I just wanted to start off there. Had a hair that was bothering me. Any questions about the guide, about just sort of talking about medicinal mushrooms overall? I'm pretty agnostic in terms of whether you choose an extract, whether you choose the mycelium and fruiting body, what you're choosing in that space. What I'm not agnostic about is the quality discussion, because this really is one, it's kind of like coffee and some of the others, where you're better off not having it if it's not good quality on that part, because they can really be negative, and especially for anyone who has any pharmaceuticals, that they're consuming, even things like Advil and Tylenol, as part of their consumption, because just from a liver standpoint, and just wanting to make sure we're not bringing in anything that's adding to a toxin burden, from a body standpoint. Any questions? Maybe give me a thumbs up if we're good to keep going on. Little heart. All good. Great. Anything with medicinal mushrooms that you're concerned about? Want to make sure that I answer. And if not, I'll go on to making the recommendations. Okay, so one of the key pieces with recommendations when it comes to medicinal mushrooms is that it is essential that we are understanding first and foremost what somebody's priority is, or what their priorities are. And then everything that is together around that, and evaluating it in totality. So I'll often talk about total nutrition, but in this case, I'm also going to talk about from a lifestyle standpoint. And what I mean by that is taking a medicinal mushroom that supports better sleep, but having a room that has a bunch of light in it, or that's really hot, or just not going to bed till midnight or 2 o'clock, it's not going to help support better sleep, right? And so we're taking something with the expectation it's going to do these things magically in our body, but that it isn't going to, that the balance isn't going to be effective. So, for example, even in that example, if I'm taking a mushroom to support better sleep, but I'm also eating really late, my system, it can't override, right? So the mushroom isn't a magic wand to be able to do these things. And I think that's pretty important. And it's one of the things that again, coming back to the start of the conversation, I find really challenging about the evidence-based nature of medicinal mushrooms, because oftentimes, you, me, whoever our patient isn't actually in that evidence, because we don't know enough about what else they were doing, right? In that regard. So that's number one. And I think that's important to communicate to our patients when we're making recommendations. Number two is an efficacious dose. So whether it's the beta glucans, whether it's other, plant nutrients, antioxidant, the compounds that are in there, you really do need to look at that. And I will tell you, as somebody who has been developing products and in collaboration with product development, very few companies outside of mushroom supplement companies are delivering an efficacious dose. And that's amplified, absolutely amplified, in things like mushroom being added to a non-dairy milk, mushroom being added to a powder for coffee, and these other things. So really important to be aware of those doses and to be able to, look at that, and then also to give a period of time. So for some of the mushrooms, you may actually experience, and depending on the person, it could be a little bit placebo, but they may experience things pretty quickly. I've had people with cordyceps and reishi, where the experience is, wow, I actually feel like I'm noticing a difference pretty quickly. And that's a good thing to have them noting, to take note of. Something like mushrooms to support your immune system. So for a lot of times I will add, when I'm working on immune healing for somebody, and working on trying to bring their body into a better immune balance, looking at a blend of mushrooms as a support. Or maybe if somebody has, been sick, maybe they've had a virus, maybe they've had, been, just down, with a cold or anything else like that, we might add that in for a period of time. And that's a harder thing to really know what the results are, right? Because what if somebody still gets sick and they're on a medicinal mushroom blend? It doesn't mean that they're not going to get sick. It means that their system is going to have the support to better be able to mobilize, that the activity that the system needs to fight. And that's really important in immune balance. I do want to flag for anyone, and if you're interested in signing up for it, just drop your email here into below the video. But I'll be talking with Jeff Bland in a session that we're doing. We're trying to make it a 1 hour session. Oh goodness, the two of us. But we're going to be doing it on personalizing immune recommendations and really looking at the distinction between boosting versus rejuvenation, which is rejuvenation and balance. So you'll hear me using this language because I'm really trying to accelerate a change in the type of language we use around immune health. Because if you boost an unhealthy system, like say if you apply an immune boosting approach to somebody with autoimmune disease, or even less than that, somebody who is where they're sick right now, that's like you're boosting cells that we don't want to boost, right? We want to actually rejuvenate and fix the problem with healthier cells and bring those in. So I bring that up because with mushrooms and their adaptogenic properties, there is that capability for them to go in and support healthy cells and the growth of those healthy cells in the so that those overrun and allow the unhealthy cells, to die off. That's part of their benefits. Okay, so I was talking about mushrooms can't override other bad choices or poor choices or not better choices, whatever terminology we want to use. The efficacious nature of the dosing is going to be really important. And then one of the things I think that's really, really important in mushroom recommendations is to get familiar with the distinctions between an individual mushroom and its benefits versus blends. And some companies are doing blends where they've got maybe like a bunch that are their standard base, and then they may add a particular mushroom, to support, something within there. But it will be really important for us to communicate, especially in these days. We're fighting for every dollar for our patients, like we're budgeting with them and helping them understand. And so there may be a benefit, for example, for me to do lion's mane and CoQ10 as supplements, and maybe a good quality fish oil as supplements for someone, and not have them have a multi and really look at the costs associated with that. And it doesn't mean that selenium and zinc and some of these other nutrients aren't so important for brain health, but I'm able to work with them from a food standpoint, and using our trace minerals evaluation or coming up our trace minerals optimization program to be able to meet those needs so that they don't have to rely on that for foundational, supplement support. Likewise, from a detoxification digestive health standpoint, I may use glucoraphanin or sulforaphane and turkey tail, and then turn around and say, and maybe I'm adding a probiotic, but I'm going to really look at the diet to deliver prebiotic. I'm going to have overnight oats, and I might even have cashews and some of these, others that are delivering that resistant starch, and not need to, look at those from a supplemental standpoint so that I can help them, within that space. And then some of the blends are super powerful. I've loved, I learned from, and, really think his work is so cutting edge. Paul Stamets, and has always been, ahead of the game in terms of that side of, medicinal mushroom and mushrooms in general. And so things like Stamets 7, I've loved that product, in some of these blends. So again, those blends can be super helpful. I personally find that shiitakes are something that I can consume regularly now. I used to hate them. And I find whether frozen or dried or fresh, in a variety of different ways, and I do get those in. And so I'm able to say, I don't maybe need that as much supplementally, but maybe something like tremolo or cordyceps or, some of these others, I'm not getting in as often, and that's going to be important. Now, one of the other things about making recommendations with medicinal mushrooms is to really also pay attention to other adaptogens, and also things that are that are maybe working in the same direction or working against. And what I mean by that is, if I'm taking ashwagandha, and then I also decide to take reishi or cordyceps, are those complementing or are they working against? And it's going to depend on the individual and depending on what we're looking at. But I am going to look at my caffeine intake and my ashwagandha at the same time, because there may be, for me, from a genetic standpoint, caffeine is creating more stress for my body. So it's better for me to actually reduce the caffeine intake, i.e. decaf, and then have the ashwagandha. And now I'm really getting the better benefits from a stress standpoint. And that's how, from a recommendation standpoint, we can use mushrooms to be much more strategic and not have people just be thinking about them as Band-Aids, if you will, I can just throw this into the mix and it's going to start to trigger, something different from a system standpoint. Likewise, if your brain is overloaded, if we're doing too many devices, if we haven't used our stress guide to kind of get rid of the stress we don't have control over, a lot of control over, et cetera, and we've got all this stuff going on, a racing brain, if I add lion's mane to it, are there some potential benefits? Absolutely. Are there as many benefits as if I put it as part of a program where I'm doing all these other pieces? And that's how you can help somebody also recognize the investment value of, well, if I'm going to take lion's mane, it's probably also a good idea that I, in the evening, maybe when I take my lion's mane is when I turn off my phone, or I step away from my computer, or I stop doing Instagram or, whatever on that part. So those pieces. All right. I've got about 5 minutes left. I could talk about medicinal mushrooms for the ages. I'm so passionate about them. Of course, we're not here getting into psilocybin and some of that. Of course, it would just be a much, much longer conversation and, on that piece. So I won't do that. Okay, eating fresh lion's mane, absolutely. How awesome. And if you go back to like Paul Pitchford's book or some of the others that really look at traditional Chinese medicine, again, look at healing, Ayurveda, absolutely, and consuming them as part of like congis or slow cooked, stews, and certainly also being able to add them to things like salads and others. However, there's a however comma, making sure on the quality front. So I like organic, and if you happen to be able to know like organic and it's locally grown and you have confidence with where it's locally grown, that's just a little bit better in my opinion. And then in terms of how you prepare it, that's also going to be important because you want to be retaining the nutrients. And again, a lot of properties in the fresh ones are going to be fat soluble. It's a great question. I haven't done a dose to dose comparison. I think that would be one we would. You're growing your own. I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, I totally think growing your own so that you've got that. That's like gold standard. Awesome to be able. I used to grow the oyster mushrooms and some of the ones on the kits that those companies. I think that's so brilliant in that way. I would just look at the research on, because there are a couple of different doses. For some reason, I have 2 grams in my head, but you know what? I probably haven't taken my lion's mane today, just a little joke, but I wouldn't take me for that. What I would do is I would look at what's considered the efficacious dose of the beta glucans if you're looking for a research, like if you're looking for an outcome that has been researched, but then you have to remember to quote unquote extract that of, okay, that's the amount of beta glucans that was used from a supplemental standpoint. How does that translate over? And I am certain there is a resource for that. I would direct you to somebody like a Paul Stamets and some of their research to see, who's talking about the amount in the fresh, but I don't have it off the top of my head on that one. Really good question. And then there's also the part of it, if you're growing it and you're consuming it, just to basically be able to say, this is such a good food for nourishing my digestion, my overall health, and my cognitive function, and I'm not doing it for the therapeutic, like the dose related therapeutic benefit. So we only need to look at the dose if we are trying to match an outcome and use it in that medicinal capacity on that piece. Really good one. Any other questions or thoughts about medicinal mushrooms? You guys recommending products? As I said, they're everywhere. It's probably like the number one set of ingredients, type of ingredient that I get asked about as we're in supplement development with other companies. So it's interesting on that part. Okay. Oh, and I will also say there's a lot of debate between the different brands and how they're trying to distinguish themselves and say, we did this better, we do this better. There's a lot of better and there's a lot of not better, but the infighting between some of the other brands is there is also some to just be like, okay, I get it. That's you just trying to get somebody to buy your particular product on that part. Not versed enough to recommend. Okay. Well, and that's something that could be interesting for you as you, as with anything, considering, exploring it or considering exploring it associated with one area, so I mentioned, for example, immune balance, immune rejuvenation, and we'll be talking more about that later this month. And again, you can drop your email in if you want us to make sure. I think FULLSCRIPT will be sending out the invite. We're doing it on behalf of FULLSCRIPT, but I think they'll be sending out the invite, over the course of the next couple of weeks, and you can certainly sign up there on our site. We just don't have the sign up link just yet. So that's why I was going to save you the step if you want to attend. But in some instances, we just know that that's going to be super beneficial for a certain patient population. And so that might also be something where if you're like, oh, I often get asked about medicinal mushrooms as it relates to, like, I have one that I always get asked about, which is while nursing for new moms, what are things they can do to support better energy, right? And it's like, I get it, right? So going through if that's a patient population for you or some of these areas, so you may not need to get versed in all of medicinal mushrooms and feel that pressure in that capacity, but you may have a targeted area, or you may just want to use the guide if you get asked questions to help people, start to make better choices just from a quality standpoint, and not have the recommendation come from you. So we've got both of those sides. All right. Well, I'll end on time, which is surprising for me with medicinal mushrooms. But thank you for joining me. And if there's any practitioner that you feel like would benefit from listening to this, please feel free to recommend them in. Of course, they have to join the Facebook group, but you can share that. Or if you have any comments or questions that come to mind after the fact, please just drop a message to me in the chat box, and we'll take it from there. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye.